Very impressive. So thank you all for taking the time of your day, and I think everyone's been checked for rotten tomatoes and rotten bananas. Do want to recognize some family members. Alex Nixon, my cousin, his wife Marky. My other cousin, his brother John Nixon, his wife Mary. Their brother Huxley Nixon. My father Cobbs, my mother Minta, and my wife Tricia is here as well. So I've got several friendly faces out there. So I'm looking forward to sharing with you a little bit of my family's history, specifically as it relates to their contributions to the development of the city of Augusta, both West Augusta and South Augusta. I also want to thank a couple folks before I get too cranked up in this. I owe a real debt of gratitude to Mary Strickland Leonard, if you'll raise your hand in the front row. Mary is a title abstractor extraordinaire, and through her effort, she researched a number of tax parcels for me, all the way back to the acquisition by my great-grandfather, Gwen Henry Nixon. So we'll talk about that. But without Mary's work and Mary's map she gave me, I wouldn't have gotten this far. So Mary, thank you very much for that. And also relied on Eric Montgomery. I saw Eric somewhere. Eric and the resources of Historic Augusta were tremendous help. So thank you, Eric, for your contribution as well. So, like many families in Augusta's history, the Nixons have our share of fascinating folks who made impacts on the city while they lived here. Augusta grew and prospered through the actions and contributions of thousands since 1736 in ways large and small. My family contributed in their own way through actions motivated both by personal economic benefit and a desire to improve the public arena. But before we dive in, I have to tell you, I was looking through the family tree and I was reminded of the story of the two fellows talking about their family trees. And one of them said, I was a little scared about digging into my family tree. I might find something I didn't want to find. The other said, well, what did you find? First guy said, well, I didn't find any strange branches of the family tree. I didn't find any spots where the branches were cut off. I didn't find any, like a ladder looking thing. So we were kind of a normal family until I dug a little deeper, and really all that's in my family tree is a bunch of nuts. That may be what we have here. So this is our agenda. We're going to talk about first how the Nixons came to Augusta and some Nixons from that line, and then the other half of the equation, as far as I'm concerned certainly, is how my great-grandmother's side, the Scotts, arrived in Augusta. And then we'll talk about Gwen Henry Nixon, my great-grandfather, and some of the land acquisition efforts or initiatives he had. Some developments, some specific tracts and how they contributed to the development of West Augusta and South Augusta. And then some later 20th century Nixons that many of y'all may know and may have recalled. So we'll start with the Nixons. The Nixons came from the Scottish-English border regions and were apparently proficient in the age-old economic activity of stealing your neighbor's horses. They were known as the border reavers, and there's the Nixons right there. There's some Nixons right there. You may also see some Scotts, some Armstrongs, Hollies, a whole bunch of families. And the border reavers were about 36 families, or clans. They were raiders along the Anglo-Scottish border. They included both English and Scottish folks, and they raided the entire border country without regard to the victim's nationality, emerging really as a real distinct group between 1350 and 1450. They operated in a culture of legalized raiding and feuding. Their heyday was in the last 100 years of their existence during the time of the House of Stuart and the House of Tudor. As the years went on, the family also spread their wings and settled in Ireland. Now, I don't know if we have any of the border reaver traits still in the family, but it does show our solid Anglo-Saxon stock. The first Nixon in Augusta was a first-generation American, Mr. John Washington Nixon, who arrived in Augusta in 1865. He was born in 1822 in Louisiana, and his father was born in County Fermanagh in Ireland. John Washington Nixon was a paymaster in the U.S. Navy, who resigned his position in April 1861 and took up the same position in the Confederate Navy, originally stationed in New Orleans. His wife, wanting to join him and fearing capture at the hands of the federal troops, fled their home, they were living in Maryland at the time, by crossing the icy Potomac with her 2 infant sons and her silver. As the war wound down and the tide turned against the South, John Washington Nixon and his family moved to the Atlanta station and then ultimately to Augusta. Records show that in 1865 he purchased 260 acres south of Lumpkin Road, for $35,000 in Confederate money. This property was called Concord, and they moved into an existing house which later burned in 1906 and was replaced by a log cabin hand-constructed by a later Nixon family member in the early 1930s. After the war, the 1870 census showed John Washington Nixon reside as a clerk in Augusta with his wife and 7 children. This is a picture I found on the internet of a Confederate $100 bill. You can't see it, but on the back side, the endorsement, it says J.W. Nixon. So somebody collects Confederate currency, and this one was listed and noted about what he's doing for his job. He became a successful cotton factor and later also purchased a house in town at 946 Reynolds Street to be close to the cotton markets. He died in 1888. His second oldest child was Gwen Henry Nixon, and he is important to our story today. So I'll take a second and talk a little bit about the family tree so we can kind of figure out who everybody is and put this in some relevance to the names and faces we'll be talking about. So here's John Washington Nixon. One of his children, Gwen Henry Nixon, my great-grandfather, married Eliza Huxley Scott Nixon. One thing you have to keep in mind with my family, you have to keep track of all the Gwens, all the Huxleys, all the Henrys, and all the Scotts. We like those names. They had 5 children, 4 survived infancy. My grandfather, Scott Nixon, Margaret Nixon, their sister, Gwen Huxley Nixon, the attorney from town, and their brother, Francis Nixon. I come from this line, Caroline Hill Nixon, my aunt Brailsford, that's my father Cobbs, Minta, that's me, my brother and sister. And the other Nixons in the audience come from Gwen Nixon, their sister Eleanor, Sally, Huxley, Alex, and John. So that may help put a little bit in perspective of how we're all kin. So this is Gwen Henry Nixon. He was born on January 3rd, 1861 in Maryland, died July 1920. After college, partially funded by a scholarship from Alexander Stephens of the Confederate Vice President of the Confederacy, he taught at Richmond Academy, later becoming a bookkeeper in the cotton factor house of Mercier and Company, later forming his own cotton factor's firm of Nixon and Danforth, which later became Nixon and Wright. He dabbled in horticulture and apparently developed a variety of a cantaloupe. It's amazing what the internet will come up with. This was sold in seed catalogs in the late 1890s. One satisfied customer noted the fruit ranged from 12 to 18 pounds. This came with a clip from a seed catalog, and the seed catalog says, quote, "The Nixon cantaloupe, this splendid melon, originated here and has for years been the favorite in this city. Combining size with flavor, we consider it one of the best. By careful selection for several years, we have kept it pure in its original type. Round, rough skin, thick meat of rich flavor and sweetness. Superior keeping qualities, often weighs 8 to 12 pounds. While cotton was king, it appeared Gwen Henry Nixon and others in his family prospered. In his spare time, seeing the need for good government, he ran for and was elected to the first Richmond County Commissioner, along with Louis Berkmans and E.F. Vergery. Perhaps most importantly to our story, 1, he was a real estate investor, enjoying the accumulation of land, apparently largely for the sake of the accumulation. And 2, in January 1899, he married Eliza Huxley Scott. He died youngish, she was 59, and she was left to keep the family and her family's inheritance together. A couple of his siblings have interesting stories. His brother, J. Slidell Nixon, married Uma Ull, the daughter and owner of 140 acres off Lumpkin Road. Slidell, who was born in 1857 and died in 1915, prospered in the cotton and grocery business and lived in a house he built known as the Castle, which was at the corner of Lumpkin Road and Richmond Hill Road. He and his brother William Maddox Nixon operated a grocery store at the corner of 9th and Fenwick Streets, which is the Nixon grocery store there, from the Historic Augusta book. According to family lore, his crowning achievement was the planting of pecan trees across the 140-acre parcel, which many are still there. I'll tell you where they are in a second. This helped him survive the economic ravages that the boll weevil had on the cotton industry. After his death, this land changed hands several times and ultimately became Faith Village, or the Alleluia Community.
Oh.
So this is, let me kind of set you straight here. This is Lumpkin Road, This is Richmond Hill Road. So all this is Alleluia Community. So if you wander through Wheeless Road and come down to the Alleluia Community on Richmond Hill, and you turn on Lumpkin, this is J.S. Nixon, 140 acres. This is G.H. Nixon, Gwen Henry Nixon. This is the property that that's known as Concord. This road right here is Deansbridge. So Lumpkin Road runs into Deansbridge. Augusta Tech is all in this area over here, to kind of give you some perspective. Now we'll talk about how the Scots got to Augusta, and then put 20th century Augusta and the rest of the Nixons into context. Again, got to keep straight: Scots, Nixons, Huxleys, Gwens, Henrys. John Godwin Salt and Thomas Knight Scott are father and son. So my great-grandmother, Eliza Huxley Scott, the future wife of Gwen Henry Nixon, is from the branch of the famous Huxley family, the Huxley family from England. Her great-uncle was Thomas Henry Huxley, the famous biologist and anthropologist, famously known as Darwin's bulldog for his public and energetic advocacy of Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. She was a cousin of Aldous Huxley, the author of the famous dystopian novel, A Brave New World. Her story starts with another Eliza Huxley, Thomas Huxley's sister. She married a Mr. John Godwin Salt, a London physician, this fellow right here, a London physician who fell on hard times and into scandal, leading to he and his wife's departure from England under a cloud of disrepute. They left the old country, aided by Thomas Huxley, who had been a partner with Dr. Salt, and of course was her sister. She was his sister. Interesting story, Mr. and Mrs. Salt left the old country as Mr. and Mrs. Salt on the boat that came over and arrived in the New World as Mr. and Mrs. Scott. The name change was a fresh start indeed. One of their children, Mr. Thomas Knight Scott, who was born in Tennessee, came to Augusta in 1893 to work for the Georgia Railroad in Augusta as the general manager. He retired from the railroad in 1913. He was married to Margaret Watkin Cobbs of Lynchburg, Virginia, and they lived at 820 Millage Road, which is the White House, kind of one to the left of Gould's Corner. One of Thomas Knight Scott's daughter was Eliza Huxley Scott, born 1875, the future wife of Gwen Henry Nixon. She was known to her grandchildren as Granny Lizzie. She lived to be 88, dying in July 1964. She played a large role after her husband's death in 1920 in acquiring and maintaining his preferred investment vehicle, land. All right, that kind of puts everybody together. So I want to talk about some of the tracks that you may find interesting and how they tied in with the development of Augusta, both westward and southward. Gwen Henry Nixon, the real estate investor, would leave the cotton exchange in the afternoons and travel to visit his many real estate holdings. The cotton business must have been good, and he invested his capital into land. Based on my research, it's difficult to say if there was a rhyme or reason to his purchases, but he accumulated large tracts in West Augusta and in South Augusta near the Savannah River. Looking at these pictures, it's easy to say, wow, those investments really paid off. But we have to remember these tracts were purchased in the 1920s, 19-teens, in very, at that point, rural parts of Richmond County. I suppose they were arable and they could be rented to farmers, but Savannah River land was river bottom land, mosquito-filled and prone to flooding. So it appears, I guess, he enjoyed purchasing land for the sake of purchasing land, was an opportunistic buyer, purchasing these tracts for apparent bargains. In many cases, he purchased them on installment or bought them in foreclosure at the courthouse steps. We can perhaps imagine him coming home and saying to his wife, "Guess what I did today?" And she rolling her eyes saying, "Again with the land." I'll highlight several notable tracts. This part of the story is to record and catalog the history of how the land was acquired and how it fit into the larger story of the development of the residential West Augusta and the commercial and industrial South Augusta. As I researched the origin of these now developed tracts, it became apparent that this is the story of someone who chose to invest in land, maybe hoping the future development potential was closer to the future than it turned out to be. There was no real estate investment returns to speak of for that land in that day, that far out in the county. In fact, it was only in the mid-1990s, for example, that the Augusta Exchange tract were sold and then further developed. That's a difficult return on investment to justify if you're focused only on that matrix. But if he and his wife's goal was to preserve assets for future generations, then that certainly was accomplished. It's notable too, I'll point out, the family continued to see themselves as land sellers. So the tracts we'll talk about were ultimately sold. We were just land sellers, not developing it for future development. So a few notable tracts. So Turpin Hill is an older part of town. So this is Somerville. This is Pendleton King Park. So 15th Street comes out, it turns into MLK as it crosses over 13th Street. And so there's MLK as well. And this is a development known as Turpin area of town called Turpin Hill. Millsville Road runs this way to the Gordon Highway. Turpin Hill this area was originally a military encampment established in 1898 for African American soldiers during the Spanish-American War, laid out on land provided by Colonel Daniel B. Dyer. Dyer had moved to Augusta to invest in the electrical development of the city. After the war, Colonel Dyer, also of the Dyer Building and the Great Augusta Fire fame, developed the old Camp Dyer into residential lots to be serviced by his Augusta Street Railway. However, in 1910, Gwen Henry Nixon, for $10,000, purchased 731 lots in the Turpin Hill addition, along with 74 other random lots, from the Manhattan Trust Company. It appears the land had been foreclosed on and was subsequently sold by the bank. In the late 1930s, Eliza Huxley Scott Nixon, at this point a widow, began selling lots. Most of the sales were to African American residents, making Turpin Hill one of the first opportunities for land ownership. The family ledger that I have, thanks to my cousin Alex, shows monthly collections of $5 to $10 as payments were made toward the purchase price of the lots. And my father, Cobbs Nixon, one of his early jobs was to go and make sure the payments were actually being made. He helped make those collection payments to buy the lots. So if you look at the Augusta map today, this is laid out in a beautiful grid with this grand boulevard right down the middle of it. Mm-hmm. All right, these next three of the next four maps are from the courthouse record book that Mary Leonard showed me. Shows all the Richmond County property owners in 1928. It was compiled and created by the surveyor George Summers. So I want to talk about some of these tracts. This is the Savannah River right here, Savannah River. It started in 1916. Gwen Henry Nixon started accumulating land along the Savannah River, several miles below downtown Augusta. He died in 1920, as I said, and in several cases his widow completed several installment sales to ultimately accumulate over 2,000 acres that range from today's Augusta Regional Airport, which is kind of up this way, down south to property, which is what this is, to what us old-timers would know as Continental Can. So this is going to be 56 moving down south toward Burke County, and this was land ultimately sold and developed into what was called Continental Can back in the day. So again, Savannah River. And this is a fascinating set of maps. So this is the surveyor, and this is all the property owners in Augusta, in Richmond County rather, in 1928. So I've highlighted some tracts they also own. This is the Central of Georgia Railroad. Bushfield's kind of here. And we'll talk about this track in a little bit later on. This ultimately was at some point the local 4-H camp area. Mm-hmm. This is Mike Paget Highway 56, and this is the railroad, as I said. These acquisitions also included land west of the river along the Central of Georgia Railroad, which parallels today Highway 56 Loop or Doug Bernard Parkway. Later, a portion of this property was given to the state for an educational farm to teach timber management. More on that in a bit. This is an interesting map. It's a topographical map. In 1965, I found. It notes Bushfield. It's an area of town called Mechanics Hill, which was new to me. This is Bushfield. This says County 4-H Camp, so that's the tract of land I just highlighted in the previous slide. And this is interesting. We've loved this. This is Nixon Station. It is a railroad crossing where the newsprint plant is. If you head down 56 Loop Doug Bernard Parkway before it swings back to Mike Paget, there's a railroad crossing here, and it's known as Nixon Station. All right, let's talk about some of the West Augusta interesting tracts. Starting in 1917, Gwen Henry Nixon began paying on installment for $20,300 for 734 acres known as the O'Connor Place on, quote, the Walton Way Road and Wheeler Road. This is west of the Walton Way Wheeler Road intersection, incorporating today's Augusta Exchange, Sam's Club, Crane Creek. So that would be this track right here. So let me set you up here. This green line here is Walton Way. That's Lake Allman. So this is blank over here because this is the city. This is where the county started. So Walton Way comes up the hill. That's Lake Allman. That's the intersection of Walton Way and Wheeler Road. Mm-hmm. So First Baptist Church is right here. Mm-hmm. Walton Way moves on. So this track here was acquired for $20,300 in 1917. Further reference point, this is Walton Way. This right here is Skinner Mill Road. That's where it forks off of Skinner Mill. And then this is where it dead-ended it effectively and took a right turn. That's Pleasant Home Road. Goes up to Martinez. We'll come back later on. Scott Nixon Memorial Drive did this number to get you over to Bobby Jones. But it encompasses, so then he bought that. Then in August 1821, Eliza Huxley Scott Nixon, the widow, purchased at foreclosure 756 acres, known as Murray Hill, from the Almond Corporation for $16,855. This tract ran east, back toward town. So I'm orienting, we start here, we're going back toward town. Down Walton Way, from the Skinner Mill, Walton Way intersection, which is right here, back this way, all the way down almost to where I guess Langford probably is.
Wow.
That's my estimate. Mm-hmm. It also included Wheeler Road. This is Wheeler Road. So Wheeler Road down to probably where Westminster is, on the other side of Brace Creek. This again, Walton Way. This right here is Almond Road. Kind of continue to give you perspective, and that's Race Creek. It encompasses what is now the Murray Hills, Westwood, Brynwood, Waverly, Highgate, and Conifer subdivisions that were sold and developed later as Augusta development moved west out of the city into the county. Another interesting tract, another opportunistic purchase, later became Daniel Field. In 1891, a group of prominent Augustans formed a corporation called the West Side Development. It included Mr. Cohen, John Davidson, Charles Evans, a number of notable folks in Augusta in the 1890s. And they owned, the corporation, West Side Development, owned for future development 302 acres at the southwest corner created by Wrightsboro Road, which is right here, and what was called Old Wheelus Road before it was renamed Highland Avenue. The corporate documents authorized that corporation for 20 years. And in 1911, 20 years later, the corporation was acquired by Gwen Henry Nixon. It just says the charter expired, and then it says the charter now was owned by Gwen Henry Nixon. It appears the transaction was just him taking over the corporation as the legal rights had expired after the 20 years. No money changed hands. At this point, its sole asset was still the 302 acres of unimproved farm and woodlands. 16 years later, in 1927, the city of Augusta, under Mayor Riley Daniel, purchased those 302 acres for, quote, a park and playground facilities. Although, according to Ed Cashin's book, Balloons to Blue Angels, the worst kept secret in town was that the mayor envisioned an airport, a recreational area, and municipal golf course, which is the patch. By that time, Westside Development was owned 4/5 by Eliza Huxley Scott Nixon and by Fanny D. Batty, Mary Nixon's ancestor, respectively the widow of Gwen Henry Nixon and wife of Alfred Batty. Sales price was $110,000, paid in 10,000 annual installments. So this land was acquired by the city and obviously Daniel Field and the Augusta Golf Course, the patch. Another notable tract was at the forefront of the initiatives to recondition depleted farmlands and also had a tangential context to Augusta's other airport. So let me go back just a second to South Augusta. So again, this is the Savannah River. This is kind of where Bushfield is. We'll talk about this tract right here that was owned by Gwen Henry Nixon. On October 5th, 1932, 100 acres was conveyed by the state to the state of Georgia by Eliza Huxley Scott Nixon, quote, for and in consideration of her interest in the reforestation and development of the abandoned and marginal lands of Georgia, farmlands of Georgia, and of her desire to perpetuate the name of her husband, the late Gwen H. Nixon. She gives the land as a state forest and to be used to demonstrate the practical utility of timber culture as opposed to agriculture. In 1933, a request was made to turn the forest over to the Civilian Conservation Corps for the reforestation. Men who would recondition this property would be recruited from FDR's peacetime army. It'd be their task to recondition the forest to meet the standards desired by the U.S. government. The reforestation includes draining, clearing out underbrush to prevent forest fires, timber thinning, and replanting. An Augusta Chronicle article in May 1934 states that since the CCC got involved, they have been planted 27,000 cypress, 20,000 black walnut, 20,000 black locust, 12,000 cedars, 10,000 longleaf pine, and slash pine. In April 1941, 18 acres of the 100 acres was abandoned by the state of Georgia back to Eliza Huxley Scott Nixon to effect the relocation of New Savannah Road so they could build what became Bush Field. She then conveyed the 18 acres back to the city for free, without profit to herself, to the development of the planned aviation school and landing field, all of which became Bush Field. So it's an odd connection that we have to both airports in Augusta. In the late 1940s, the property was gifted to the 4-H Club by the state and operated as a camp for another 65 or so years. The 80-some acres reverted back to the family in the early 2000s when the 4-H Club ceased camp operations. All right, the next generation of Nixons have contributed in their own way to the growth, success, and promotion of Augusta. This is the next generation. Let's start with these handsome fellas. Gwen Huxley Nixon was the next youngest child of Gwen Henry and Eliza Huxley Scott Nixon. He was born in 1906 in Augusta. He was educated at the University of Georgia and practiced law for many years in Augusta at his law firm Nixon, Yale, Waller, and Capers. Gwen personally rebuilt and lived in the log cabin on Concord, I mentioned earlier, the one that had burned. He rebuilt it and lived in it. My cousin Huxley lived in it as well, grew up in it. That was the property purchased by his grandfather in 1865 when the Civil War ended. The original house burned and Gwen Huxley Nixon rebuilt it in the 1930s, and it still stands, though no longer family owned. It stands on the campus of Augusta Tech. In 1966, on the same larger parcel, Gwen Huxley Nixon donated 10 acres to the Episcopal Diocese of Georgia to construct and to use as an Episcopal convent for the Sisters of St. Helena. The convent is no longer in use, but the building is now occupied by a local private school serving children with learning differences. So that's Uncle Gwen, that's my grandfather Scott. Scott Nixon was the oldest surviving child of Gwen Henry and Eliza Huxley Scott Nixon. He was born in 1901 in Augusta, and the city remained his everlasting love and source of pride. He was a booster of Augusta, leaving mementos of Augusta, Georgia, wherever he traveled. He was an active member of the Augusta Ports Authority, promoting Augusta as a viable inland port for decades. He was passionate about public service and was active in local politics. He was one of the founders of the local Independent Party, which in 1948 tossed out the local political machine, the Cracker Party. He also served as chairman of the Richmond County Commission. When Richmond County wanted to connect Walton Way Extension to the Bobby Jones Expressway, the highway that would become I-520 was under construction between May 1963 and January 1966, and in 1977 it was redesignated as I-520. Before that, it's what we still call it, the Bobby Jones Expressway. At a county commission meeting in 1970 to vote on acquiring land owned by the now deceased Eliza Huxley Scott Nixon to connect Pleasant Home Road at its intersection with Walton Way and Davis Road back to Bobby Jones Expressway, Scott recused himself to avoid the appearance of any conflict of interest. All the way down the Columbia County line was renamed as a joke for the very much alive Scott Nixon. The road regains its name Pleasant Home Road in Columbia County to its own intersection at Flowing Wells Road. Among his other accomplishments, he was instrumental in the founding of this museum, the Augusta Museum of History. It fit his innate desire to promote and preserve the city he loved and wanted to see succeed. He was an tireless photographer, frequently seen with several cameras around his neck, both still and movie cameras. Throughout his life, Nixon recorded over 76,000 feet of film,
Whoa.
His work includes an extraordinary 16-minute compilation of his travels to 38 cities, towns, and locations named Augusta across the eastern, midwestern, central, and southern United States. This 16-minute silent film is arranged in no specific order, stringing together brief scenes and shots of these communities. The scenes vary, ranging from street scenes and landscapes to shots focused on local businesses, post offices, train stations, kind of the mundane parts of lives in these little towns. Most of them have the name Augusta in it. The film was preserved by and currently resides with the rest of his collection in the archives of the University of South Carolina. On December 19th, 2012, the Augustas, which we'll watch here in a second, was selected for preservation by the United States Film Registry by the Library of Congress as being culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant. So this is on YouTube, and this is the, we'll spend, I don't know, it's been 30 seconds or so on this, to show you a little bit about how he made his movies. He had a kind of a wicked sense of humor, too. Starts off with a nice warning to all the gentlemen in the audience. Don't sit, smoke, or use any profane language, if you don't mind.
Don't speed, oh shoot.
So there's a street scene of Augusta, Kansas. A sign for the local Kiwanis Club.
Hey. That's attractive.
Not sure where that is. I guess that's still Augusta, Kansas, but it says Augusta. Mm-hmm. Street scenes. You know, captured the mundane aspects of these towns and American life at this time. It really would have been lost without this kind of recordation. We'll watch a couple more seconds, and then we'll move on.
New Jersey.
There's New Jersey.
Who would have thought?
I've been to Augusta, Montana before. I don't know if that's on here, but this is near Indianapolis. It shows Augusta right there.
It's amazing.
There's the sign. So pretty incredible.
And that's all on YouTube. We
All
can
on
watch
YouTube,
it.
exactly right. Mm-hmm.
Hot damn.
So moving on from Gwen Huxley Nixon and my grandfather Scott Nixon, other Nixons who contributed to Augusta. This is my grandmother, Caroline Hill Nixon. She was an Augustan. She attended Tubman High School and graduated from Winthrop College in Rock Hill, South Carolina. She was active in volunteer work in her adult life, and in 1956 she joined the Augusta Chronicle Herald staff after working as a librarian before that in charge of the Appleby Branch Library. She was a society editor for 15 years, and during her time at the paper she noted the random comings and goings of her life and Augusta life, sharing anecdotes and insights about her children and her city. Topics range from the excitement from trips downtown to the stunned and shared sadness of JFK's assassination. So this is, it wasn't long, but a little conversation piece, and I'll just read you a little bit about it because it also touches the mundaneness of Augusta life. Watching summer through the closed windows of an air-conditioned house is like seeing a silent movie. Breezes ruffle in the deep foliage of the dogwoods, but there is no rustling sound. The vines are moving, but there is no faint scratching against the house. While the heat builds up, our air conditioning houses maintain a perpetual spring, thermostat controlled inside. We have traded the welcome stirring of summer air on a sweltering day for a cool, silent house. Now, lest you think she was pining back for hot days, she does end saying, few would trade their four-way adjustable air conditioners for these and many other sounds and scents of summer. We turn on the radio or TV or whatever noise we're accustomed to about a little artificial air freshener in these closed rooms and count our blessings. You may know these two folks here. The one on the right is my father, Cobbs Nixon. Who had a long career in commercial insurance in Augusta. He was very active at this museum, was president of the museum, and is also still active in the trustees of the Academy of Richmond County. His actions in Augusta certainly helped a lot of businesses and people thrive throughout our community as it continued to grow. His cousin, my cousin, Alex and John and Huxley's sister, Eleanor Hernley, you may know her. She had a long career in education, most famously known as the teacher of Latin and German at Richmond Academy for a number of years. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it. I'm happy to answer any questions. It's a little insight to my family and how it mirrored the growth of Augusta and I think the success of Augusta. And I very much appreciate the opportunity to learn more about them and learn about their commitment to the city and to the public good. And I thank you all very much for your patience and staying around long enough and awake to listen to me.
Any questions for Cameron? There we go. Go
Yes, ma'am.
ahead.
Hey,
Is the castle still standing?
it is not. So if you come down to Richmond Hill where it runs into Lumpkin Road and hang a right like you're headed toward,
Who last owned that?
I don't know who owns it now.
But who last?
Oh,
The Clemens family
That's
lived,
what I was-
Dr. Gil Clemens lived there for a long time.
that's right, yeah.
But it had been sold by the time vandals burned it down. I think homeless were living
Yes, sir.
Did you bring any lemon, any
And cantaloupe,
cantaloupe, or is the cantaloupe still around?
I could only find 2 references on the internet to the Nixon cantaloupe. So I don't think it made it very far. I did learn that a cantaloupe was also called a mushmelon.
A mushmelon.
I had never heard that before. So I don't think the cantaloupe made it past the 1910 seed catalog. Yes.
What are some highlights you see for the future of the Nixon family in Augusta?
Well, for y'all, I'll sit down here very quickly. So that'll be a highlight for you.
Cameron, Dr. Caldwell has.
Oh, yes.
I just wanted to add something, since you have Eleanor's picture up there. I knew her, and she was really an incredible person, but one of my colleagues at Augusta University said she was the most intellectual woman in Augusta.
Yeah, I've heard that before. Yep, yep. Yes.
Where exactly was the Concord track you said with the log cabin?
So it's kind of back, it's between Lumpkin Road and Deansbridge, essentially where Augusta Tech is. So the Concord property, the cabin still exists. So I didn't get a picture of it. That would have been interesting. There was an article in the 1930s in Southern Living or one of those magazines like that that chronicled Uncle Gwen's construction of the cabin.
Good Housekeeping, February.
Good Housekeeping, yeah. And so it's the Augusta Tech area.
19.
there. Yeah, one of the funeral homes built a funeral home close to the corner of Dean's Bridge. I think it was Poteet. And that was the old Grimal Dairy site, correct? And Concord was up on the hill beyond it. And the sand in the road was so deep, we knew to get out of the car and start pushing as soon as we pulled off of Lumpkin Road.
The entrance to off Lumpkin Road is the entrance
To Augusta Tech.
Augusta
Augusta
Tech.
Tech. That's the road, it was a sand road, and we used to get stuck half the time going up and down.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, there's a big rock up on Skinner Mill Road,
Uh-huh.
and I think it's got a plaque on it. They call it Gwen's Rock.
So I'm glad you mentioned that. That track and that particular spot is a high spot, got some grade to it. And Gwen Henry Nixon and Eliza Alexis Scott Nixon refer to that piece of property as top of the world.
Yeah.
And that's not the site of the old big house. That was just a spot in that piece of property that was high enough that at the right time of the year, I suppose, with no leaves on the trees, you could see probably all the way to the river. When I was a kid, we used to get our Christmas trees from up there, and we used to go shoot 22s and BB guns up there because it wasn't that developed. But we dedicated that rock in 2005, I think, to their memory. Thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah.
And the rock was moved there in like 2001.
from somewhere in Columbia County.
It was moving to, yeah, from Columbia County, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
I think I took Latin 1 week on me from that lady. I mean, she gave a test every day. First day I made 90, second day I made 80, third day I made 70, fifth day I made 60.
Uh-oh.
And she came in the class and said, we got somebody in the civic class who wants to take Latin. Is anybody in here willing to swap?
That's pretty good.
That's the only foreign language I ever took, and I got out of Georgia, and they said you're supposed to have 2 years of a foreign language. Well, they checked everything, and they said, we don't believe you're going to be able to graduate. I said, well, there's got to be something in the business school. And they looked and looked and looked and looked down, and they said, you know, I can't believe it, but finance. I said, you know, that's exactly what I want to major in. I couldn't have picked about a major.
Right.
Because I think I must be kin to the old Huxley, because I like to buy real estate because they ain't making no more.
That's right. You're right there with them.
Right.
Yes, Barry?
I don't think the day should finish without talking about the generosity of the Nixon family in support of St. Paul's Church, the museum, the Kiwanis Club, and many other worthy causes, because the Nixon family has really helped this community in so many ways.
You're kind of Thank you.
Perry, thank you. I want to add that the Nixons gave the property for St. Augustine's and the building where the pastor lives.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, the rectory.
Correct.
Yeah, yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's give him one more.
Thank you very
round.
much.